Hi everyone, this week we've got Paul on the show. Paul's been in the industry 30 years, set up Landlord Action 23 years ago, Chief Commercial Officer, Hamilton Fraser. You'll probably also recognise him from the media and stars in Channel 5's hit show, Nightmare Tenants and Slum Landlords. Paul, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And my first question for you is on the eviction side of things. So what's happening on the ground level?
So on the ground, Lee, in the 23 years I set Landlord Action up, we're the business we've ever been. That's the reality. Section 21 instructions have gone through the roof. Landlords have been serving notice mainly because they're selling up and getting out. That's because, of course, of what's happening with regard to Section 24 interest and obviously the hike in interest rates, which happened in September last year, as well as a whole lot of worries about regulation and obviously the rentals not paying. So, and then, of course, rents are going through the roof. It's really tough on tenants. And, of course, there's more rent arrears. So, yeah, it's really, really tough for tenants out there, but also really tough for landlords. And obviously we've got post-COVID, and of course in COVID there was no evictions taking place. We've seen rent arrears going through the roof, and our rent arrears department busier than ever. But yeah, really busy.
Brilliant. And you just mentioned Section 21. So what's your thoughts on how scrapping that will affect the impact on the tenancies?
So I've been heavily involved in that at government level, and also we compiled a report some 3-4 years ago with the Lettings Industry Council called Beyond Section 21. I said, and I've been saying it in the press constantly, way back 3-4 years ago, even prior to COVID, you can't abolish Section 21 until you get to the courts right. And there was talk about having housing courts. I was on that working group. I said at the time, you've got to get our courts right. In principle, housing courts look great. But the biggest problem we've got now, and I know this, is when there's a struggle in employing more judges, and they're having to try and get judges out of retirement. Judges that understand landlord and tenant law. There's a real massive shortage on bailiffs. I think there's a bigger issue with regard to a directive that's been given, maybe me being a bit cynical, but we have a temporary accommodation crisis, we have a social housing crisis. Councils, London councils have something like 30-40,000 people on waiting lists. More and more tenants are staying put because they want to be rehoused by the council. You can't abolish Section 21 until you have mediation brought in place earlier on. You need to make sure the grounds of Section 8 work. That's to be understood, and we need to see how that works. You're going to have a lot more hearings, so you need the judges. You need to make sure that a lot of the courts are working and have a lot of digitized systems in place. Tenants need to be able to make sure that they can understand litigation better and have advice that's being able to be offered out to them. You need to make sure that maybe you might have some remote hearings that take place as well. I worry about backlogs. And of course, they announced only at the National Residential Landlord Association last week and on the second reading at Parliament. And Gove said this himself, you can't abolish Section 21 until we get the courts right. Now, that's a $6 million question, Lee. When will that happen? How will that happen? The reality is that we're going to be having an election maybe the beginning part of maybe 2025. I should think the Conservatives will want to make sure they've got some sort of legacy, especially when it comes to the voting polls with regard to tenants, that the renters reform is sealed and done and dusted. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I'm a bit cynical. I've only been doing this since I was 16, 17 years old. As you can see, I'm only 25 now. I'm 52 years old. I've been going to the court. I know the courts better than anyone. I've got 23 staff at Landlord Action. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of investment. Morale with judges is an all-time low. Bailiffs on average are getting 22 to 24 grand a year. Who wants to be a bailiff? You should be able to use high court enforcement bailiffs, high court sheriffs. You can't, there's a struggle to try and get the leave. And even when you do get the leave, the High Court are slowing up the transfer of the High Court. I know that's a very long answer, but I need to explain it because your viewers need to understand what's happening. And that's what's happening.
Thanks, Paul. No, I fully appreciate that. And it is a difficult situation, and there's a lot of news around it. So I appreciate.
By the way, I'm not sponsored by Red Bull, by the way. So I just walked right in.
Brilliant.
I'm trying to get some sponsorship endorsement.
No, I like it. But yeah. I want to ask you on gaining possession. So do you have to use an eviction specialist?
So what you do have to use is a regulated firm of solicitors. Like Landlord Action, we've been regulated solicitors since 2014. There is a saying out there, cheap is always expensive. And I say this to landlords. Issuing a possession claim is the hardest it's ever been. I first issued a possession claim in 1991 when I worked in a firm of solicitors. That's my background. It's harder. There's the Deregulation Act. There's a return deposit. There's HMO licensing. You know, there's a lot of unregulated eviction companies out there. You use them at your own peril. Yeah. The old saying, cheap is always expensive. You know, if you're going to use a plumber, you're going to use one that's certified.
Yep.
You know, to work in your house. It's the same when you take an eviction out. There's so much money at stake. One smallest mistake, we end up taking over loads of cases from an unregulated eviction specialist. So, you know, use a firm of solicitors, someone regulated, someone that specializes in it like we do, or a landlord and tenant solicitor. There's so much at stake if you get it wrong. Bearing in mind now, delays. The courts, Lee, are the worst I've ever known them. It takes ages to see a judge now. So you can imagine, you wait all these months, you go before a judge, you have a 5-minute hearing, you plead your case, the case is not pleading, there's a small mistake. Yeah, everyone makes mistakes, but you've got to we have a double checking system at Landlord Action. It's really important, especially now where landlords are desperate to sell their property.
Yeah.
And of course, the market's hardening. You know, it's gonna come down, you know, 10, maybe 15% over the course of time. And can you imagine the landlord wants to try and sell his property with vacant possession? And a lot of these tenants are getting advice. They've got nowhere to go, and they get advice from the council: stay put and wait until the eviction date and the bailiff turns around so you can be rehoused. And then a case gets dismissed. So yeah, make sure you use a regulated firm of solicitors. They have professional indemnity insurance. So if they make a mistake, you're going to be covered.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's some really solid advice. I want to ask you about if you can tell me a little bit more about some of the other services that you're seeing that are popular with landlords at the moment from the Landlord Action side.
Yeah. So our core business is possession. You know, we deal with about 2,500, 3,000 instructions a year. We have a specialized debt recovery department, which is busier than ever. It's really hard to try and collect money against ex-tenants. We do tracing. We've got a really great tracing company we use with a 75% success rate. And we are now finding a lot of landlords are trying to enforce the money orders. So when they enforce it, it becomes a county court judgment. Then it shows up in their credit rating, where a lot of landlords weren't worrying about it, and they were letting tenants get away with it. So we have a debt recovery department. We deal with rent repayment orders. We deal with squatters. We deal with HMO licensing issues. Anything to do with landlord and tenant generally, we will deal with it. You know, even deposit penalties. So we have 2 senior solicitors, and we've got about 4 solicitors, and we have caseworkers. So yeah, you name it, we do it. And we're there to try and help. You know, bearing in mind that me and my old partner, we were the first people to set up a fixed fee possession service way back in 2000, because we wanted to make sure landlords got a free advice line, got some advice. And we're proud to be called the landlord's friends, and we're like emergency plumbers for landlords. No one likes to really call us, but you know you're there as a backup, really. So especially when it's the most distressing time for a landlord, when, you know, especially a lot of the smaller landlords, but then the 1 to 3 landlords, we're doing a lot of that type of work. But we do loads of corporate work for a lot of letting agents.
Brilliant. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and thank you for taking your time out.
Pleasure. Thank you, Lee.